Hello, everyone. I'm Dominique Johnson-Lindsay, and I want to welcome you to the Active Listener podcast by Lightspeed. As a lifelong learner and the daughter of a Navy veteran who became an elementary school teacher, education and service are in my DNA. This foundation, paired with my love of technology, led me to these conversations with remarkable minds shaping the K-12 landscape. Join us as we amplify these vital voices and explore how active listening remains foundational to educational excellence. Whether you're an educator, administrator, or someone passionate about the future of education, there's something here for you to learn.
Welcome everyone to the Active Listener podcast. I'm so excited to be back for season 2. So today I have a very special guest joining from Massachusetts, which is one of my favorite places. We have Brehm joining us from Dayton, Rehoboth. Also, he is a Medfield school board member and a background of over 2 decades leading technology efforts. So anything from director of IT to CIO, right? So before we get started, Leo, I would love for you to just introduce us to yourself and give us any background that I may have missed.
Sure. Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Dominique. My name's Leo Brehm, and I am the district business administrator here in Dayton, Rehoboth. But most of my career has been a school CIO or something in the technology realm of schools. I did a short little stint in ed tech, and then more recently, I'm stepped in as the interim president of MassCUE. So, if you're familiar with Massachusetts computer using educators, or been to our event at Gillette Stadium. That is an organization that needed a little extra help, so I've been stepped in for the next 6 months or so. And I do serve on our school board in Medfield, which is a nice little bedroom community just outside of Boston. And thank you for having me today.
Yes, I'm so excited to dig in with that much experience. I have so many questions and so much to talk about. So let's start off with your current role, because that one is pretty interesting to me, coming from, a more IT kind of side of things to doing business administration, which deals with more of the finance and budgeting. So talk to me about how you kind of see this role now, where you have to kind of balance the two. Like, what's happening on the other side, but you also now understand that, there is a budget and we have to kind of stay within those realms.
Yeah, I think it's been good that I have a lot of practitioner experience, so that when we're reviewing the budget or, if decisions and prioritization comes up, I think I bring a good lens to prioritizing the right things, with the rest of the leadership here. There's a lot of interest, obviously, to sharpen the pencil, if you will, I think is the term used when we want to trim the budget down, but making sure that we have strong teaching and learning in front of students, and that we're providing for the students what they need and meeting them where they are is paramount. Now, my background around technology, obviously, I can, I have a good lens on how technology can help that and streamline that. But again, maintaining the balance and making sure that we have strong educators and we're supporting educators appropriately, I think is one of the things that I bring to the table. And it's been interesting, being in charge of the budget. We have about a $54 million budget coming this year. And, most of that is for our staff and, making sure that the staff are happy and supported so that they can focus on what's really important, which is our students.
I love that. And that makes total sense. I feel like that has been such a topic of conversation as far as, not being too focused on any one side of things. We're not too focused on innovation and not on teachers, or we're not
Right.
too focused on students and not on innovation or that kind of thing. So like trying to keep it all balanced, is definitely the sweet spot. And obviously I think everybody kind of, I won't say struggle, but they just work to figure out what's the right mix for their school district. So that makes total sense.
100%. Yeah, the innovation side does help out, right? It can help bridge the gap sometimes, and I know we're here with Lightspeed, and Lightspeed plays a large role in that in many of the districts I've worked in. And they've saving teachers' voices. Out of all the technology I've implemented in my career, I would say that the the voice lift technology in our classrooms has been the most used and the most widespread across all the districts I've worked in.
Wow, that's so interesting to hear, just knowing how much technology is kind of implemented across the board. Obviously, there are things that the kids use specifically, or there's things more related to like the school itself. And so to hear that, that's kind of like really interesting, but obviously makes a lot of sense because we use our voices every day. And obviously teachers use their voices every day.
Well, and that's part of it, right? It's the blend too of that delivery, right? So, it was happening before the pandemic, but the pandemic definitely focused on the idea of good digital curriculum, right? And with digital curriculum, as we know, there's a lot of video used, right? There's a lot of multimedia. And you know, back before we started really thinking about it, teachers would attach those little desktop speakers, to their computer and have that to play whatever multimedia was in the classroom. And that audio was terrible. You'd hear the rattling of the speakers and they wouldn't work right. And then occasionally you would see something called a red cat that would show up in a classroom or an FM system, right? And it was good for picking up the voice lift. And, at some point, one of the things I said, why can't we connect this to the computer somehow? And, working with your team in one of my districts, we started doing that in every classroom. So it's become part of my design in every classroom, particularly if we're building new buildings, to build that in. And now, post-pandemic timeframe, the role of video and multimedia is really just a commonplace. So audio has to be there. But one of the things that we haven't done in some of these classrooms is, taking that into consideration. I think some of the touch boards that you see have okay speakers in them, so it's a little better. But the classrooms that are outfitted with some of your technology that are built right into the classroom, the teacher doesn't even have to think about it. They kind of click on a mic, can pick up their voice, but the speakers all in the ceiling is also integrated with their technology, right? Their computer and everything else. So they don't even have to think about it anymore. And I think that's the part that is really amazing because it just allows the teacher to do their work, which is connect with students and make sure that that content is really reaching learners in a meaningful way. I mean, it was nothing worse when you were even, I don't know about you, Dominique, you look much younger than me, but, when we got excited when that gigantic cart rolled in with the television, right? And then because the classroom was so big and they only had a 27-inch television, they would crank the speaker up on the TV and it would rattle. The plastic would rattle as the volume would go. And like the experience was not that great, when you're trying to watch the grainy video on the VHS tape that they stuck in the VCR. And for those younger folks on there, the VCR is what we used to play movies with. So you
Oh,
can see them in museums now.
no, that's like definitely like my sweet spot. So I can remember, enjoying all of this and kind of seeing the shift. So I remember going to computer labs versus when we started
Yep.
having computers in our classrooms and stuff. So it's interesting to even think through this. And I think brings up like another kind of thread of discussion. And that's talking about like innovation and kind of keeping classroom, fresh and up to date. What is your perspective, again, just knowing you kind of operate in both lanes now, of what things do you look for when you decide how you want to invest in schools, or like how do you do that guidance, even from the financial side, even if it's not something you're like, oh, I know all about this, but like how do you kind of guide people with the decision making?
Yeah, it's a lot about how you're going to conduct, curriculum in the classroom and kind of future-proof it at the same time. So furniture design, I think, is a big part of that, right? Having a nice big blank space to start with, like your canvas in the classroom. But then how does the furniture, allow you for that flexibility for individual work as well as group work for Socrative conversations and then how can the technology be, there when needed, right? And there's a new, I'm not sure if you've heard of this thing called AI. I don't think anybody's talking about it at all. But how does that play into that classroom of the future and that design? And I think there's a big part of that that has to do with audio, with this shift or return of thinking of trying to remove some of the screens from the classroom because, they're on screens at home. They're when they come to school, we want them interacting with each other. We want them having those human connections with teachers. How can the screen kind of take a side role in that world, but yet still leverage the technology. And I think AI has got to be that piece. All right. And I think a lot of it's going to do with audio, and it's going to be whether it's two-way conversations, the ability to access the content that we know is available just in time without having to go to a screen, where you're asking a question of a classroom assistant or a teaching assistant that's AI in nature, right? And that's going to take some creative technology, some of which I've seen from companies like yourself, right? There's a classroom technology where the speaker kind of breaks off and goes with the groups. And I think that there's going to be something to that in the future. And so as we're designing new classrooms, we have a new elementary school project here, actually, and in the town where I live. And I think in the design of those classrooms, that's going to have to play a role. So whatever infrastructure is needed to support that flexibility for both individual time and where students are going to want time or need time to reflect on their own learning, even in those classrooms, and then the ability to engage in group work and collect that thinking that's made visible by that group, I think is going to be a big part of it. And it'll be with or without screens, and it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. It's been around a little while, and I haven't seen it fully implemented in the classroom yet, but I think it's about ready, where there's like a camera on a whiteboard and you can draw out your thinking. And then you can ask the camera to take that and put it into your slide or put it in as a doc so you can reflect on that later, right? So it brings that tactile response back to the board where you can do what you want to do there, and allows you to, engage in that. And I think that's going to be one of those innovations that is coming next. So, and obviously audio and multimedia will play a role in that, but it'll be much more integrated into the facility itself.
Two things come to mind with that. One is I love the idea of just the integration in and of itself. I think, the more connected the tools are, I think the better the experience can be for everyone. I remember even when I started the podcast, and one of the things I talked to like some of the earlier tech directors about coming on here was how they wanted to move away from some of the disjointedness of the different systems and kind of move to more like holistic, how do these things work together? So as you're talking about this experience, I'm like, you can see the vision for like, these things are going to work well together and they can be a whole experience, and not I'm logging in this platform, but I got to get my audio from over here, and I got to get, a picture from my phone and this kind of thing, where I'm like, it's awful. But we all, so
Tech director's nightmare and dream, right? The nightmare of, I've got Google Classroom, or I've got, our student information system. I've got this, I got this. And the poor teacher has to go log into 5 different things. I spent 5 years in the Newton public schools, and I was hyper-focused on the single pane of glass. How do I can get everything into one single pane of glass for the teacher and the parent and the student, actually? How do we get that all in one place? And yeah, no, haven't been successful on that yet. So, I mean, this it's better. I mean, we all know it's better today, right? We've got Google Classroom, we've got the Google ecosystem, or you got the Microsoft ecosystem, or I mean, maybe some folks even have Apple's ecosystem. But there's still reasons you have to go other places, and making them all talk to each other never quite works out well. So yeah, but you're right. I think some of it could be hardware. Steve Jobs always used to talk about the connectedness of hardware and the software working together. And maybe there's something to that, in the future, where it just becomes a little more plug and play with that physical and digital space together. So
yes, I think we're all like work in progress, waiting to see what is going to happen. I think we'll all be so excited. So.
yes, or we'll become the Matrix, one or the other. And that also might be dating me a little bit, but my son and I just watched it recently, and so he knows what the future is going to look like.
I probably would not think about it like that, but to hear the Matrix and think it's so transformative. Like I remember watching that. By the way, my sister is named Trinity because of the Matrix. So like,
awesome.
I'm a super fan. So
love it. Love that name too.
So one thing that I thought was so unique about your background, just switching gears a little bit, was I kept seeing this thread of like instruction or creativity come through. So I know you do this work with the Reynolds Center for Teaching, Learning, and Creativity. It literally just came through in so many different threads, like on your resume and just LinkedIn profile and all this. And I'm like, why is creativity something that you want to like focus in on, even though you do this other stuff that I always feel like people kind of think is more like direct and tactical?
Yeah. So I think a lot of it comes from what I realized a lot of the work I engaged in was really on the design process, right? The design thinking process where you have an idea, you try it out, you fail, you go try again, right? And throughout my career, that's what technology implementation is, right? You try something, it's a colossal failure, and then you try again, and then you kind of analyze what went wrong and take the best parts of it and take the good parts of it, and move forward. And when I was working with MassCUE, while I was in Sharon, the MassCUE board is an all volunteer board, and we were engaging in building this big event at Gillette Stadium. And as a children's book author named Peter Reynolds, he and his brother Paul have a studio called Fable Vision Studios, and hyper focused on software, education technology, and creativity. And they offered to help us out with the conference with drawing logos and those things. And so I really got into kind of visualizing the artsy side of it and the creativity side with them. And then I connected the dots with myself and my own practice, right? And so I started looking at all my projects in that manner. And it really launched into me when I got involved with a startup company called Catch On. I was approached by a young entrepreneur, and she had this idea and for education. And I kind of grabbed onto it and went on the journey with her. And in that process, I learned what it meant to be a product manager. And I became the senior product manager after we got acquired. And that was a good, cool experience, right? And I left K-12 to go do that. And it allowed me to work with districts all over the country, big ones and small ones. So as big as LAUSD and as small as a little school in Iowa that had 250 students. And all along the way, everyone's problems are the same, but using creativity to kind of look at the issue, create a solution, and then reflect on that, and bringing that creativity into what we do as teaching and learning and connecting those dots together was really, I thought, powerful. And I think it's one of the ways I see it in my own students. My daughter hates to get questions wrong, on her quizzes and everything else. And I said, no, it's okay to get questions wrong because that's how you're measuring what you know. And I said, how can we change that mentality about it's okay to get something wrong, right? And so that design thinking process that I've been engaged in for years and working with the Reynolds Center, I think is what our mission is. And I think trying to bring that into how we're bringing innovation into the classroom. And there's a lot of talk around project-based learning because that's what it is. It's the failure process, and failing forward, people call it. It's all kinds of new names. Growth mindset, there's all names for it. But it really comes back to that design thinking process. And that's how technology is created. That's how we advance it, and that's how we advance knowledge and human knowledge. So I guess that's where that comes from more than anything.
I love it. And I think that's a unique way to think about it. Because as you stated, I'm kind of like that too. I hate getting things wrong, and it's so cringe to start things, but that is the only path to learning. Like it really is. You feel like other people don't have that path, but it's the only path.
Yeah. You have to. You have to. Yeah. And the kids, and myself included, so I can reflect on that. And maybe you can too. Like, we hated to get something wrong. I think maybe we should stop using red marker to mark things wrong too, right? Can we do like blue, right? Or green or something? Yeah, look at this, something like that, because I think there's this mentality that we connect with and that students don't want to connect with being wrong. And you see it in society a little bit today too. People are really afraid of being wrong, and it's okay, right? It's okay to be wrong, and it's okay to learn from it and move forward. That's what makes us human.
Well, talking about learning from something, what do you feel like you learned from your experience kind of going into the private sector and then coming back? Because as someone who loves K-12, my mom is a teacher. I love school. I'm literally always in school for some certificate or something like that. I always think about the people on the other side, and I feel like it's such night and day experience.
It
So
is.
what you brought back and just what the difference feels like to you.
So, it's funny you should say that. One of the things I think that the business world has started to grasp is the idea of thinking and problem solving outside of the 9 to 5 hours, right? So you're kind of always on, at least if you're really passionate about what you do, you're doing it anyway, right? And I think unfortunately teachers don't always have that luxury when they're interacting with their students. So I think that's the big difference I see. Like you get 6.5 hours a day with the students directly. You don't have them outside of that time. There's a lot of pressure to squish stuff into that time. And I think that's some of the learning I did is how do we, again, I always thought technology would allow us to stretch that learning outside of that 6.5 hours. And I think one of the growth areas for us as an industry is how do we really make that happen? And I think the next generation of technology could do that. Or maybe that's where AI really steps in, right? Where AI kind of sits with you after hours and you block off the time and schedule it for students so that it can re-engage with that learning that happened during the day. And then maybe ultimately it might kind of shake up the scheduling process of teaching and learning in schools. Because today we still are kind of really connected right back to that one room schoolhouse, right? You went to the one room schoolhouse in the morning, you engaged in learning with the teacher, you took lunch when you went home and maybe did some chores on the farm. Then you went back in the afternoon and did some more learning and it worked around, your agricultural schedule. And then you took that one room schoolhouse and you multiplied it, right, into schools that we see today. And as a result of that, we have this mindset that that's when this is going to happen. And I think that's going to be the next innovation, right? And technology will play a role in that so that the things that happen that currently happen at 6.5 hours, how does it happen at different other times when students are ready to engage? School starts here at 7:15 in the morning. That's really early. Like I gotta say, that is early. And I know when I was in high school, I pretty much knew I was going to sleep through first period no matter what it was. So I don't think I was ready to engage in the content at that time. And it probably had a negative impact on my performance. So in my hometown, actually in Medfield, we're changing our start times for the high school, middle school to 8:30 in the morning next year. So we'll see how that benefits our students. My children are not happy about it. And they personally blame me. But I think it'll be interesting to see how that has a positive or negative impact in that process. And then, yeah, I think the technology will be a big part of whatever that next innovation will be. And that's one of the things I brought back. In our world, in the world of industry, there's a little more respect around remote work or engaging at different times, right? So engaging when ready and those thought processes. And that was one of the things around product development that I learned. When you have a workshop together, you're bringing your team together to really unpack an idea and bring everyone's ideas together. And how do you do that in a meaningful way, in a psychologically safe way where people aren't afraid to say something silly that might be totally off track from what you're working on, but it might generate another idea. So, and I think that's what we really want to bring into the classrooms. That's what we really want to do. And I think it's going to require us taking a page out of that design process in the industry and bring it into schools. And I think it'll help that learning immensely.
Absolutely. I can believe that. And I'm definitely a asynchronous kind of person. So I just want to get it done when I work best. So it's funny you talk about getting up in the morning. I'm such an early riser. I will start my day at 3 a.m. and I'm like, I just want to get up and get it done. And then in the afternoon, I like to read and look at
Yep.
webinars and that kind of stuff. So like that ideal of I'm here, I'm getting my work done, but these major things that need to be done, and of course I'm still available for meetings and that kind of stuff.
Yep.
And so I see the need for that across the board. Like it's so funny because some industries can't, even outside of K-12, they kind of can't do it at all. But I'm like, this would be so nice for everyone because,
Wouldn't it? But I think I think it's the thing, everyone's talking and they're very focused on taking time for yourself, right? Taking time to refocus, the stress levels of it putting on. I think there's absolutely something to that. I agree. I think there will be some twinge to it. I'm surprised. I'm sure there's some charter schools out there already trying it. One of the areas that we need to grow in as an industry too is taking some of those best practices that are happening in those places and bringing them into mainstream. Yeah, and it's one of our struggles. Implementation is such a big struggle for us.
Yeah. So that kind of makes me think about something else though before I get out of your entrepreneurial tech, background part and move over to the school board part because I'm really excited to talk about that. What do you think ed tech companies could do better when talking to school districts, seeing that you worked on both sides?
Yeah, we need to do a better job of listening to what they need and actually delivering it. So, and it's not always easy. So that was a lot of the learning that happened for me. Here we are, a little startup that gets acquired, and now it needs to prove itself, right, in the market, and that usually means making money. That just comes with the territory, right? And but making money requires adoption, and a product that people need and want. In my role as the product manager, you really got to go listen to what people need, and then prioritize. The company wants you to prioritize on what's going to sell more. And then there's always the part of you that says, but this is going to be much more helpful for learning, right? And so finding that balance is hard. Those companies, I think that's what the industry definitely needs to figure out, that balance a little bit, because there is a long-term investment and a short-term investment. And I understand both. And the short-term investment is what's going to keep you in business so that you can provide that long-term solution. And our product definitely fell into that space, right? I think that industries need to develop a plan, a dual plan, one that's focused on just-in-time, immediate things, and then that long-term item that people need to respond to, and working together. I think that we talked about the integration problem, and there's some great organizations out there like One Ed Tech and EdFi that try to get tools to work together. And I think the hurdle is still the adoption of those. Those adoptions aren't prolific enough yet, but they're getting there. And I think those organizations do great work on trying to get the vendors or the business community, or they call them suppliers, to talk with the practitioners, be it, the teachers and whatnot, and kind of connect those dots. And it's something I brought back. I do sit down, with companies, and I say, hey, we want to partner with you on making this a better product for us. And then you can turn around and make a better product for all of your customers. So, and in turn, hopefully that means more sales for them and a better product for us. And that partnership is what's going to make it successful for everybody. So I hope that answered your question.
It did. And I'm always just curious to know. Obviously, I'm on the ed tech side of things, and so I read a lot of the Ed Week or whomever that's kind of talking specifically to ed tech companies, and we partner with other companies in the ed tech space for just certain things, and so it's always interesting to I don't think the direct question is always like how can we sell more stuff, but it's truly how can we be a better partner? Like what things do you all see value in? And I always think that like the podcast is a fun place to kind of understand that a little bit more. It's not so heavy and tied to any specific thing. It's just like, what do you think? Because we know how we feel about it as like consumers. So how do you feel about it from, your role in the district level? Because one thing we've often heard about is just the onboarding and like adoption process, like how to support that with people. One of the things we always see on the Lightspeed side is we love y'all for like coming out and actually doing the like in-service trainings and like the ease of use with like setting up and even having the support team, come out or be on call to like make sure that we get the product up and running properly. Because a lot of people have so much friction at the front end that they have a negative perception of the product on the back end. So, it's just always good to hear.
I would say that's something that Lightspeed does very well. The product has been designed with the teacher in mind. It's very easy to put on, turn it on, right? And even the built-in into the classroom version of that is very easy, plug and play. And I'll tell a quick story. My wife is a teacher at a local school district. They had a brand new high school built, and I got a chance to go in right in the summer. She was setting up her room, and I noticed a very similar design, one that I put in many buildings, where the Top Cat system is in the ceiling. And I said, and she goes, well, how do I get the audio from the computer to there? I said, well, if it's designed like I would have designed it, you'll just plug it in, it'll know, and it'll just play. And sure enough, yep, HDMI system went in, an ultra short throw projector. We put a video on right through the speaker. Not a problem whatsoever. And that kind of zero complication is really what, we're striving for as a technologist, right? You really don't want the user to even think about it all that much. Probably some of the feedback from me even from years ago saying, hey, this is how we really want it to be. And I think companies that listen to that, especially when, your company's getting into more individualized items, like, the group speakers you had. And I haven't even looked in a while too, but I know you were there. And talking about that classroom of the future I mentioned, I think there's going to be something to that. And so making sure all the teacher needs to do is kind of drop them down, right? And or if they need to label the speakers, they can just quickly, hit a button a couple times, right? This is number one, this is number two, and this is number three, and set them all out. And I think, with that thinking in mind, making sure that it's really, there's no barrier. Now, you mentioned going to the computer lab as a child in schools, and I did as well, but there's nothing worse that could happen for a teacher is the computer lab not working, right? You get in there and every screen's got some sort of crash on it, and if you're a teacher, you're like,
What is
right? And then what happens? The teacher will never go back again, right? The teachers won't use them again. So that was some of the poor design in that process, right? Whereas if you're a lab person that takes care of the lab, you want to make sure you turn it on and it works, right? And we spent years as technologists trying to make that happen. So I think it goes right back to companies listening and making that happen and prioritizing that. I think is really important, for the industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Without a doubt. I feel like that is one of the top, outside of the actual technology that you offer, that's probably the next thing on the list. It's like, it just has to be that kind of.
It happens a lot too. Like the quality is when you do a hardware product too. Like the quality is really important, and so like the battery life and the durability, so that you kind of can rely on it. And even though it costs a little more up front, you're not replacing it every 3 years. You're replacing it in 8 years and 9 years. So there's a real value to that as well.
Exactly. So, of course, last part I want to talk to you about, and this is so interesting to me personally, is a person that works in the school district deciding to run for school board because school board, of course, always feels like just very political. And so I feel like people like to work in their classrooms or they like to work on their craft, and they say, I don't want to get into politics. So, what motivated you to want to be on the school board?
Yeah. So I was involved in my startup at the time with Catch On, and I was still working in some other schools, but in my own school, my son was in first grade, and there was 25 kids in his classroom, his first grade classroom, and we kind of didn't know about it, and there was no aide in the classroom. And and even though I know that there are classrooms with one teacher and over 30 kids sometimes, and I understand that, I felt really passionate about class size, especially at a young age. And I've worked in some districts that really prioritized it. So I've seen what could be done if you prioritize lower class sizes, because you make better connections as a teacher when you have less students to connect with. And I know a lot of the people in the industry, and I emailed the superintendent and asked, if I couldn't find the class size policy online. And there was one because it was in the table of contents, but it was missing. And he never got it back to me. So I went to the school committee meeting to ask about it. And there were a lot of other parents there. They were upset about the class size piece. So then I got asked by some other parents after I spoke at the meeting to, hey, you should really run for the school committee. And I'll be honest, I was like, I don't know, that doesn't sound like a good idea. I'm going to be totally honest with you. They wore me down over a couple of weeks, and I said, okay, well, I'll pull papers. And I didn't realize I was actually running against somebody, but we did run against somebody, and it was an interesting experience all around. And going back to core values is what I really thought it would be about. I think districts who focus on the core values, student learning, class size happen to be one of them. Those core values allow you to really drive your work and your mission. And perhaps my town had kind of lost sight of that, as a committee, as a school committee that was there. And it happens over time as, you have people coming in and going. Sometimes you have to stop, reset, and refocus. And districts do a lot of that now with strategic planning. That's what I decided to do. Ultimately, I ended up being successful in my run. And it happened to be the same year I left K-12 to do Catch On full time. So it was a very interesting time. It kept me in the schools. And I was pretty focused on what I really wanted to help the district do. And curriculum was one of the big ones too, organizing our curriculum and supporting new positions to help that. So we supported a new director of curriculum and instruction so that that person could come in and lead that charge in our district. I would say we've made some really great strides in that. I would have to say that we got cell phones out of classrooms this year. So that's a big one, I think, a big success, even though it's got some mixed reviews from students. Teachers support it, though, 100%. And I think we're seeing a lot of student feedback is saying that, it is a little easier to stay focused in the classroom, too. And the pandemic, I will say, was not the best time to be on school board or school committee. That was a trying time. And to make decisions that had such a very large impact, both in my own life and other people's around me and my neighbors. So I think that was a very difficult time period to be in that position. But you also learn what, the best of the community. You see a little bit of the ugly of the community. But all in all, the community came together and really had a lot of support for the schools and our students. And I think that for us, the rebound or the return happened a lot more smoothly. There wasn't a lot of learning gap to cover once we returned. And so I think that was a benefit of that as well. So anything else about the school board?
You're
There's
like,
a lot to talk about.
No, so I think the last thing I wanted to ask with this is, what do you think about, I guess, or what would you say to someone about the relationship with like the school board and how they make decisions? Because I always feel like, interestingly enough, school boards are something that most people are so passionate about, because I think a lot of us just know like education is the foundation of everything. Many of us have kids or parents or peers that are in the school system. So it's kind of like the thing that touches everybody, but is not the actual like government. Like it's like this nascent piece. And so I'm saying all this to say, what do you think is kind of that like misconception? Like, what do you wish people knew about people that make decisions on the school board that would kind of like help smooth things?
The thing about education is it's very personal for people, right? If there's one thing, you probably bump into somebody. They probably went through a similar experience that you did, right? Going to school. And it's extremely personal. You can probably say, I really don't like your clothes, but where you went to school, right? If you were to comment on that, it'd be very personal, right, to them. So, for people who go, run for school board, I would say 9 times out of 10, it's very personal reasons that they're there because they feel like they can make it better and support it to make it better in their own eyes. I think that because of that personal reason, they bring a lot of that, like the things I bring to the table are around, around classes, teaching and learning in classes. I think everyone brings some of that, and I bring a little bit more because of my profession, about insight, if you will. But I'm passionate about innovation. I'm passionate about connections with students. Everybody brings a little bit of that to the table, and sometimes there's reasons. They have very specific reasons as well, right? They really had a bad experience with it, and they feel like it needs to be changed. And I think one of the pieces that everyone gets surprised about is how much feedback you get. And it's generally when there's something wrong, right? When everything's going great, people don't generally give that feedback. We get them, but we seldom get the ones that say, just wanted to let you know everything is going wonderful. Or this principle is amazing. We do get it. We do occasionally get those, but most of the time it's, how dare you put a solar canopy in this parking lot near my house, right? Or something like that. I think that's a real one, right? We're getting that one right now about one of our schools. And what I think the things that you do realize is that you can communicate very loudly in your community and no one's going to hear you until it impacts them in some way. And I think that's probably one of the biggest struggles as a school board member is communication, because here's this panel in my town of 5 people. You've got the largest chunk of audience is parents, right? In a school, in our town, you've got 2,600 students. a couple, on average, 1.8 parents per, right? And you feel like you can get a good chunk of the community that way. And even then, until it really impacts them, you're really not going to get the feedback you're looking for. So you're not going to know if the decisions you're making are going to be successful right away. Case in point, the school start time. People were all supportive of it. Next year, we'll see how that goes when kids actually have to go to it and see how that pans out. So I'd say that's kind of the biggest aha moment, is kind of remembering that, education's so personal, like everybody's gone through it. And recognizing that too, I think is also important, because there's all kinds, depending on where you live and how much religion plays a role in your family. You may have gone to parochial schools or a private school where they've really focused on certain things. It really shapes you as a person and the people you meet. I went to a parochial high school just outside of Boston, but through 8th grade, I was in a traditional public school. I think the biggest difference for me was the different people I got to meet from other parts of Boston, right? The diversity I got to experience, as opposed to my friends who stayed in school in my little town. And I was fortunate to have that opportunity, to do that. But I also had to pay the price for that too. I had to get on a van and drive on a van for over an hour to and from the school each morning and each day. So like I said, it's different for everybody, and I think the school board is the collective of that, right? You're this buffer, and you're this punching bag, and you do have to make decisions that will impact a lot of people that you just don't realize will do that. So you have to have a tough skin, I think.
I love it, and it makes total sense what you're saying. I think any positions of leadership kind of sound this way, but I'm like,
Yeah.
I can see it even more with the school board. Like
Especially then it's totally unpaid.
Of course, like
yeah.
So my last question before we get to my 2 fun questions to end is advice. So of course, as we're hearing all the time, people are not coming into the K-12 profession anymore, whether they're coming in as teachers or, on your side of things, like the professionals doing the technology or curriculum, whatever.
Yeah.
What advice or what would you say to people today to encourage them that there's still value in coming to K-12?
That is such an excellent question. The thing I missed when I left is I missed the camaraderie. I think there's a different amount of camaraderie with your peers and your colleagues in a school that you don't get. You do get some in the professional world, but I don't think it's as tight a connection as it is when you're working in schools. And you won't know until you do it, right? Until you're working in a school with the teachers, you just won't know. And I worked for 14 years in the Sharon Public Schools in Sharon, Mass. And I felt like I was so connected to that town. It was very hard for me to leave. I knew I had to go though, because I had started there when I was 22. So I really knew I had to grow outside of that. However, I felt the connectedness that I still have today. I've been gone there 14 years now, and I still have connections there that are so strong. And I think that is one draw, because it is a community. It's a sub community in the community, and you become a part of it. So that's one draw. I would say in many states, you still can get a pension. And I think that's one thing you don't get much anymore. And so there is a little bit of that security. Now, you're not going to get paid as much as you might in the other space, but there is personal pride and satisfaction you get when you see students succeed. And when you're a part of that. And when you're supporting that, even if you're just supporting that teaching and learning, you will see the success. And I had students I made connection with, even though I was in the classroom for a hot minute in my career. But I had a lot of directed studies with students, and those students all have gone off to do great things. You get that set when some of them come back and thank you, which is it's even really nice. And it happens a lot to teachers, and I think that's one of the reasons. So. Yeah, you won't be taking a personal yacht on your vacations, and you may not fly first class, but you get to have some flexibility in your time and your connections, and you are a professional. And I think today we're learning to start treating them more like professionals. The whole learning community. So it's not just the teachers; it's the paraprofessionals. They're going to playing a very large role today, right down to our building custodians and maintenance folks. They all make it all work together. I'm very proud of what they do here at Dighton Rehoboth as well. Our leadership here, right from the superintendent, assistant superintendent, on down to our principals, leadership team, all the way down to our custodians. There is a strong culture that's been built here over the last 3 years, and I'm really proud to be a part of it. And and I implore people to give it a try, especially young people. You will always benefit from the experience you have from working in a school, because you'll be able to apply it in other industries. And I learned that firsthand. Everything from business management to product development. You can pick up in that space, and you can touch all industries because you're training students to go into all these industries. So you get the ability to connect to all these different industries, and if you have interests in there, and you can acquire and work with students on learning, it can be exciting in that variety of content and subject areas you can touch upon.
I love it. I love it. And listen, as someone who always says, I'm going to teach for my second career, I'm like, yes, this is perfect. All the way down to the pension. My mom laughs at me because, of course, she's like, whatever. I'm like, no, you can still go get like a pension. So I'll have both. And she's like, so last two questions are kind of like my lightning round. I ask every podcast guest these two questions just because I think they're fun and a perfect way to end. So first question is, if you could remove any barrier in schools, what would it be?
I would say the time constraint is one that we talked about earlier. I think the time constraint really limits creativity for both the students and the teachers, and that creativity to focus on learning more impactfully. I think so. Time constraint is one, for sure.
And then last question, what is your favorite sound in the whole world?
Wind blowing and birds chirping.
I love it. I love it. Very peaceful. It's so funny. I'm always seeing what side people come out on, whether they have like a more peaceful side or something like loud and crazy. So.
I mean, dinner bells. Do you get dinner bells?
No dinner bells yet. So that one would be new too. That's probably my favorite. Well, I want to thank you so much for doing this. I had so much fun. I feel like I learned so much. So I was soaking all this up. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. It was great talking to you.
That's all for today's Active Listener. Thanks for tuning in. Share your comments on this episode on our Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn social media pages. You can visit our website at lightspeed-tech.com to learn more about our mission to ensure every student hears every word. And subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Until next time, let your listening be as active as your learning.